Welcome back, everybody. I'm Glenn,
Michael.
Woods and Bates, and today we're going to talk a little bit about marital property.
Assets and debts.
So, Michael's going to get us started. When somebody comes in and they say, I'm thinking about getting a divorce. What do I need to be thinking about as far as my property, and what can I keep? What am I probably not going to be able to keep? Things like that.
So anybody that comes in and sees me for a divorce matter, first thing I ask them to bring is a few years worth of tax returns, current bank statements for any financial institution, whether it's checking, savings account, money market account, stocks, bonds, retirement accounts, whether that's a 401k, or if you're, for example, if you work for the state of Illinois, maybe you have your state employment retirement systems pension plan that you could bring in. And the reason you bring in those documents is to decide what is the marital assets that would be subject to division through a divorce. So the state of Illinois says marital assets are any property acquired during the marriage. So if you get married on January 1st of 2019, any property you acquire after that is marital property. But there are some instances where property that you acquire during the marriage would be considered non-marital property. So why don't you give us some ideas of what non-marital property would be?
I would think non-marital property would be things that I came to own prior to the marriage.
That's correct.
I would think non-marital property would be things potentially that I inherited from other people. But I think some of those non-marital assets can probably be converted to marital property, if I remember my law school courses well.
In those situations, it's called commingling. So if you inherit $50,000 cash gift or cash inheritance from Uncle Freddie, and you take that $50,000 and you deposit it into a joint bank account with your spouse, and you use that bank account to pay bills of the marriage or use that for any other purposes, that's a joint account, and that then morphs into a marital asset. So one thing to be very careful of when you're essentially estate planning for your marriage is if you do receive a gift or inheritance and you want that to be considered non-marital property in the event you are possibly going to get divorced in the future, you want to make sure those assets are kept separate. So you get your inheritance, open up a separate bank account, deposit that money in that account, and leave that money there. You want to be able to trace that money back to its origin, back to that non-marital nature.
So Illinois says we're an equitable division state, correct?
That's correct.
Somebody's got to decide, here's how we're fairly going to divide these assets. Some states are not necessarily equitable, but maybe 50-50 division, things like that. But let's say that I'm, later in life and I decide I'm going to get married, or I've got a second marriage. Can I contract with my to-be spouse to say, these are assets that we're going to consider no matter what to be non-marital property? Can I enter into an agreement like that?
Yes, absolutely. So Illinois has a statute that specifically speaks to prenuptial agreements. So prenuptial would be prior to the marriage. Postnuptial agreements would be after you get married. Typically, postnuptial agreements are frowned upon. Prenuptial agreements, though, like Glenn mentioned, you and your spouse can enter into a contract that says, here is my Schedule A property that belongs to spouse A, and that property will remain spouse A's property in the event of a divorce. Same with spouse B. Spouse B would have a schedule of property as well, that property would remain theirs in the event of a dissolution. In those prenuptial agreements, typically it will define what is separate property, and then it will define what is joint property. So again, the state of Illinois is not a separate property state. Some states in their divorce statutes say that property acquired by spouse A remains spouse A's property and spouse B, and vice versa. Some states say community property, it's a straight 50-50 split. Illinois likes to be difficult, and we're going to call it an equitable division property. Well, what's an equitable division? I think the law says what's fair under the circumstances. So what's fair, Glenn?
Yeah, I think I'll leave that to the judges to decide. I guess that's above my pay grade. But I think some of the premarital planning too can speak to not only divorce. I mean, you can do some premarital planning for the event of death. You know, here's what's going to happen if I die. You know, you may want a potential spouse to waive rights to some of the assets you own now with blended families and second marriages and things like that. You know, maybe I want to protect my assets for not only the person that I'm going to marry, but make sure those are there for my children, you know, in the event that I were to meet my untimely or timely even demise, I guess. So with a lot of things, I think little planning can go a long way.
Absolutely. And another large marital asset that a lot of people don't think about, because typically people think about what are the assets they own. They think about their car, their house, bank accounts. Well, one thing that is typically always divided in a divorce are your retirement assets. So your 401k, your pension, as we discussed, those are marital assets if they were acquired during the marriage. So if you are contributing to your 401k as an employee, those contributions are marital property. If your employer matches those contributions, again, those are marital assets subject to equitable division. So at the end of any dissolution case, typically one of the largest assets that we divide is the 401k and the pension. And one thing that those assets get divided pursuant to a qualified domestic relations order. And in my practice, I see issues come up where divorce is finalized, and in the divorce decree, it says the retirement assets shall be divided pursuant to a qualified domestic relations order. Well, a lot of times those qualified domestic relations orders never get entered, and an individual comes to the age of retirement and says, well, hang on a second, I was supposed to get half of my ex-spouse's retirement, and we're sitting here now at retirement age and they're not receiving those assets. So that's something to think about too. Any property acquired during the marriage is subject to equitable division.
And equitable, I guess, does not necessarily mean 50-50.
No, it does not. And it typically looks at it on a case-by-case situation. So if one individual contributes to the marital estate, so if one person is the sole employer, one person makes improvements to the real estate, and the other spouse really didn't do a whole lot during the marriage, then maybe the laws of equity would balance in favor of that spouse that was the quote-unquote breadwinner in the family, and maybe an equitable division would be spouse A would get 70% of those marital assets, and maybe spouse B would only be entitled to 30 because they didn't contribute to the marriage as in the same manner or in the same amount as the other spouse.
So I suspect there's a lot of differing opinions in divorce cases as to what is equitable.
Absolutely. And I take the position that if everybody is sitting down at a table, you have spouse A, spouse B, and their respective attorneys, everybody should be able to write down on a piece of paper, turn it upside down, and slide it across the table, and everybody should be relatively close. Unfortunately, in real life practice, that rarely ever happens. So,
well, I guess as with most things, if it's not in writing, that's up to the determination of the people that wear the black robes.
Absolutely.
Well, if we can answer any questions about that, we'd be happy to do so. We are in the midst of the playoff baseball. Who do you think is going to win it all?
Houston Astros are looking very, very tough. I do like the Atlanta Braves, though. Sorry, Cardinals fans. We got local guy, Kevin Seitzer, hitting coach for the Atlanta Braves. Seems like in the ninth inning, the bats get rattled up there against the Cardinals anyways.
Yeah, Houston does look pretty good. I hate Houston.
Yeah.
Can't root for them. I'm going to root for the Yankees.
Yankees?
Yeah. All right, well, join us next time. Thanks for joining us this time. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you.